All right. If going first is hard, going second is arguably also just as hard. So what I need everybody to do is we're going to start a murmur. So we're just going to say like, oh my God, have you heard who's number two? So everybody just start doing it. Oh my God, have you heard who's number two? Oh my God. Oh my God. Did you know? Did you hear? Have you heard the word? It's Ward Ruprecht. Give it up.
I grew up on 150 acres of forest and farmland in the backwoods of west central Wisconsin, and my parents had a real laid-back attitude towards personal safety. Result of that is that any given day of the week between the ages of 6 and 14, the best place to find me was out in the back of those woods. And I had two favorite activities at that time. First of those is I'd go down to the tool shed, grab a point-tip digging shovel, sling it over my shoulder, walk back to the back of the place where the red maple grow up tall and straight and about 2.5 feet thick, and I'd dig a hole. I'd dig a big old hole, about 4.5, 5 feet wide, about 4.5, 5 feet deep, and then I'd get down in the shade of that hole and lay my cheek against that cool earth, and I'd take a nap. I was a weird kid. Second thing I like to do out in the woods is I'd go down to the tool shed, grab a Kemp's ice cream bucket, walk back to the tallest hill on the property. On the east slope of that hill was a wide, deep green swath of blackberry vines, and I'd spend a couple hours down there in those vines stomping around, putting about half the berries into the bucket and the other half down my throat until I'd sway home with 2 or 3 pounds of blackberries from my mother and a real bad gut ache. And it was on one of those trips when I was about 10 years old that I met the hog-nosed snake. Now, the hog-nosed snake comes in a wide range of coloration, but they all share two distinct physical characteristics. First, they've got a thick body relative to their length compared to most other snakes. And the second is they've got an upturned snout. Looks real cute. Kind of like Marilyn Monroe, but snakier. This particular hognose was about 3 feet long, yellow with brown spots. As I looked down at her, lazily coiled around herself in the shade of that blackberry vine, I saw the way the sunlight caught in her scales and the way her body made knots with itself, and I thought she was just about the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen in my whole life. Now, when I wasn't out in the woods, I was watching PBS nature documentaries. So I knew that hog-nosed snake don't present any danger to human beings, so I did what my personal hero, Sir David Attenborough, would do in this situation. I stomped on the ground near that snake, made it do the first of the hog-nosed snake defense mechanisms. It rears up on its tail, spreads its hood out like a cobra, and tries to look as dangerous as possible, but I knew that was bullshit. So I stomped on the ground again, made it do the second of the hog-nosed snake defense mechanisms. It rolled over on its back, showed me the wide, flat scales of its belly, and did its best to convince me I had scared it to death. Now, the other thing Sir David taught me was how to pick up a snake the right way. So I knelt down next to her and put my hand behind her head, held her jaw shut, and she wrapped that thick body all the way up my forearm like a phylactery, and that was the way that I carried her back home. When I got back to the garage, I emptied out one of the Rubbermaid garbage containers that lives there, and I set her carefully down at the bottom for safekeeping until I could construct for her a more acceptable domicile. I was so excited about my new pet snake. I was excited to catch mice and feed them to her and watch her grow. I was excited to take her out on sunbathing excursions. Hell, I was so excited about my new pet snake that I fell asleep that night dreaming of her, and I was so happy not even the thunderstorm could wake me up. When I went down to check on my pet snake the next day, she was once again showing me the wide, flat scales of her belly, But this time she was floating in 2 feet of rainwater and she wasn't playing dead. I sat down beside her for a long time, trying to wrap my 10-year-old brain around the fact that I had taken the most beautiful thing I had ever seen in my life out of the place where she was safe. I had broken her, and I couldn't put her back together again. Finally, I picked up her body and I put it around my shoulders. I went down to the tool shed and grabbed a point-tip digging shovel, and I carried her back to the back of the place where the red maples grow up tall and straight and about 2.5 feet wide at the bottom, and I dug the biggest hole I ever had before. 6 feet deep, 6 feet wide. I couldn't see over the lip of it. I took out every single little pebble, and I cut off every single tree root. I patted down the sides of that hole so that the bowl of it was perfect. And I set her beautiful body out there in all her length, and I laid down beside her and pressed my cheek against the cool earth, and I did the only thing I could think to do. I told her, "I'm sorry." I've carried that snake in my heart for 23 years. Last August, I decided I needed to carry her on my skin as well. She's with me now every day, wrapped around my forearm like a phylactery. She reminds me that I have a responsibility to keep fragile things safe, and that no matter how hard I try, someday I will again break something beautiful that I can't put back together. 23 years later, I still talk to my snake every single day. These days, I don't say I'm sorry. I just tell her, "Thank you. Thank you."